Thank you for tuning in to Divine Times. You might hear a bit of thunder. My name is Hilton Milan. This is my friend Stephen, and we're here to talk today about death, dying, and transformation. We're getting some support from nature here. Steve, what are some of your thoughts?
Well, it's very interesting because as we start to talk about this, we hear thunder.
Yes.
And it's raining outside.
Yes.
And one of the sounds that comes to people when they're translating physically leaving this life is that sound of thunder. And there's a series of sounds that people go through. So it's very synchronous that as we speak about this, the thunder speaks to us. One of the elemental spirits is joining in with this conversation.
Thank you, elemental spirits. Gratitude. And it's not a platitude. Even though the words are there, there's a heart, soul, intent, a listening to the messages of nature.
Yes.
In kindness, in loving kindness, in teaching and awareness. How do we work with this, more dynamically, divinely?
Well, when we go through the process of death, whether it's physical death or psychological death, we experience a surrender. And if we don't experience a surrender, then we're holding on and we're not attuning to the inward breakdown of the elements of the body. We rise from our feet through the chakras to our heart.
Yes.
Then there's a light from our head that comes down to our heart.
Yes.
And then there is a red light.
Excuse me?
There's a red light.
From where?
Solar plexus, and it rises to the heart.
Yes.
And then there's darkness, various degrees of darkness, profound darkness at a certain point, and you lose consciousness. And at that point, there is what the Buddhists call the clear light of bliss.
The clear light of bliss.
And
so this is beyond pleasure or pain, isn't it?
yes, it's beyond all the opposites.
So there's no duality or duplicity. Like it's almost unfamiliar to much of our human experience until, at least like in my case, I have a little bit of consciousness of this in a sense of, oh my gosh, this body is just, even though I inhabit this body, and I claim responsibility for it or ownership, it's still a rental. I only have it for 100 years, give or take, whatever it is I'm on the planet. It's the same for each and every one of us, 7+ billion on the planet, isn't it?
Yeah, it's just a suit that we wear. It's a vehicle we work through. And when we go through this process of physical death, when we get to that clear light of bliss in the heart, then we rise up through the top of the head into pure spirit. I guess what the Buddhists call nirvana.
Yes.
Now, because of our human shortcomings, our impurities,
yes,
when we go through this process, it could be a split second.
When you say impurities, are they things we're born with, or that we learn or earn, or where does that come from?
Well, Hilton, it's our karmic aberrations. It's like our propensities to act certain ways and feel certain ways.
Karmic. So that suggests not just from birth, but perhaps some inclinations from
previous lives.
Yes.
And the ones we pick up in this life.
But there's great unconsciousness around even resistance or denial for many around, and many belief systems around previous lives.
Yes.
How do we contend with that?
Well, you let people be what they are.
Yes.
It's just, you point. If people can see where you're pointing, that's great. If they can't, it's not their time.
It's not their journey at this time.
Yeah, and it's like there's some people that are aware of the flow of their reactions, of their anger, of their greed, of their egoic ideas. And so part of them is awake, and that part that's awake is the one that can go through this death process and go to a very high state of consciousness.
Yes.
If that hasn't been cultivated in life, then at death, you go to where the place that you've karmically earned. And not all death is physical death.
Mm-hmm.
It's like when a relationship is over
Yes.
and you love the person
Yes.
and they don't love you back. Like that's the psychological death.
Yes.
Or when you don't.
And when they don't love you back, it's not that they don't necessarily love you back, but they love at a different frequency of a different frequency, maybe possessiveness or jealousy or insecurity. So it's almost fear-based rather than, I won't even, as much as it's faith, it's more like love, or life, like light. It's these things, isn't it?
Well, when you love somebody based on fear, it's really pity. And when you love someone truly, it's compassion.
Yes.
And sometimes you have to let relationships die because karmically you've learned what you can learn,
Yes.
and they've learned what they can learn.
Yes.
And you just go on. And what always comes to mind is that if I call it emotional love, is that if I can't have her, I will harm her. And that's the emotional love of possession and the ego.
Yes.
The higher evolvement, the psychological death, is that I love her and I hope she finds someone that she can love.
Yes.
And there's a certain level of detachment and letting go for that person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a mature love.
Yes. Yes.
And the mature love will attract mature love. Like will attract like.
I feel that, oh my gosh, I've been so immature. I have attracted a very possessive love into my life in these last years. And with great difficulty, I've come to the, discernment that, it is much healthier for me to release this love. And pray for, her to find her peace in her journey without attachment.
Yes.
Because the attachment was so constricting and possessing and insecure
Yes.
that it did not allow love to flow in the world. It had only wanted, in my case, for it to flow to this one person, and actually wanted to cut me off from loving anyone else.
Yes.
And not to love anyone else platonically and as a soul sister, a soul brother. Like soul humanity, one love, one life.
Yes.
And these, as vast as these concepts or ideas or imaginations, in the I am age, imagine.
Yes.
John Lennon said it, imagine, in his song. Excuse me.
God bless you.
It says we sneeze on the truth. I want to sneeze again, but I'll try to contain it. My gosh.
Let it roll.
So I feel like I'm transforming. Could that be?
We're always transforming. The idea, are we evolving to a higher place, or are we going to a lower place?
Mm-hmm. Is it always a choice?
Well, it's sometimes it's unconscious. We have no choice. We just go to where we need to go. It's very much like waking up in the dream and recognize the dream is going on, and
Yes.
you can direct it, dissolve it, you can fly in it. But if you don't know you're dreaming, the dream just carries you. And that's what life is like. The physical world is like a waking dream, and it just carries you, and you don't make any choices because you're unconscious. The
Yes.
moment you decide, set up an intent to be conscious of what you're doing, then you have these flashes of waking. When you're a kid or your wife or a person you care for is having a bad day and you start reacting to them, and then you stop reacting and you absorb your reaction and you give them space to be what they are. By giving them space, you have your own space, and the situation is raised to a higher level. Like someone will say to me, "You are ignorant and I don't like the way you present things." And I says, "Well, I think I'm stupid and ignorant and I don't know what I'm talking about." And they look at me like, so I'm not resisting them. You know, it's not an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You know, everybody's going to be toothless and without eyes.
Yeah, I don't recommend that.
Well, you have eyes, Hilton.
Yeah.
People
And
have physical eyes, but their spiritual eye is closed, and
Yes.
that's why they're moving in an unconscious flow, and they go to where they have to go rather than where they could go if they set up the conscious intent, the postulate of where they want to be. And along that lines too, when my mother went to the other side,
Dear precious Rose, I loved her from the first time I met her 38 years ago at one of Toronto's hotels, and we had this lovely coffee. I had bought my first apartment building. I had no money. I didn't know how I was going to close the deal, or I had the apartment, I think, already at the time.
Yes.
And your mother was a mortgage broker, and we had this delightful conversation. And after we concluded our business inquiry or exchange, and she and I never did business together, but we had tea, and she said, "This message is coming through for me. I'm a bit of a channel, for the divine." And she said, "Would it be all right with you if I related it?" And she was quite amazing. I recall she had taken, I think, her left hand, and she had just gone like this. And a transformed spirit was there of my late godmother,
yes,
Dora Alexandra. And she was, I guess, I adopted her, she adopted me, when I was 9 or 10. And we had this relationship for about 6 years until she died, or she actually translated. And I say translated because I've also heard it said that there is no birth and death. That's part of duality. So I have this relationship with her as an eternal ager, as I'm also working to embrace that.
yes,
And then, back, and Rose had almost channeled in to Dora Alexandra's, wish for me to be protected, and she had actually wanted me to be in her will, and things didn't work out, and she apologized and wanted me to know that I was greatly loved, and and just to trust that divine love,
yes,
not just from her, but from the cosmos, from creation itself.
yes,
So in creation, I've also heard it said that creation is the illusion that sustains reality. Birth, death. Please, let's talk about this.
Well, even though on one level there is physical death,
And the appearance of physical birth and this reality, but it's not the only.
well, it's just a level. Thank you.
We're getting nature, thundering in as well. Pay
So-
attention.
So with physical death, it appears that there is death, and from the point of view of the physical universe, there is death, but the energy gets transformed into a more subtle dimension. And when my mother transformed, I got there 3 minutes after she stopped breathing, and I could sense her presence in the room. And I looked into her eyes, and she was no longer with the body, although she was still connected, but she was no longer in the body. And so I recognized that her energy now had transformed to a more subtle dimension. And I closed my eyes and I looked at her within, in her new body, a body of light. And she had what we would call angels with her, some guides that were
Yes.
taking her through this transition.
Yes.
And then I stayed there for a few hours, and I just held the sacred space of a higher dimension as best I could.
Are any of these angels or beings ones that you were familiar with in name or some definement or divinement?
Yes, definement and divinement. Sometimes our spiritual help comes with our people we know, our grandparents, people we love, people
Yes.
we have a connection. Sometimes they'll come as an angel, whatever. The form that is taken is the form that we need to experience.
Yes.
But when the angels come, it's always a positive form. And some people have gone through a near-death experience, and they experience negative things. That's because of their low level of understanding. The angels, the higher nature, is always there. All we have to do is turn our attention to the higher. And if we practice a contemplative or meditative or some reflective discipline, when we practice that,
And that's a discipline of going inwards, quiet, stillness, listening.
it can be quiet in stillness. It can be focusing on light. It can be repeating a mantra and
Yes.
hearing the mantra behind the mantra. But it's beginning
And
to
a
wake
mantra
up.
is what?
A mantra is a sacred series of notes that awakens us to the subtle level.
Notes as sounds, letters, not necessarily English.
Well, I can say one right now, one I
Please.
said before. Om Ahom Pime Gurvarti Om Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya. Or
Which
Christian
means,
litanies.
which
Christian
means-
litany. It's or
Can you
and
translate what the meaning of the Om Namah Shivaya?
I am named Siva. And
Yes.
Siva is omnipresent. Siva is the life force that's behind the physical body, behind our feelings, and behind our thoughts.
Yes.
And it infuses our physical environment. It infuses our body, mind, and spirit.
Yes.
It is the one life force behind everything. It is the transcendent in the immanent being what we see, hear, feel, think, touch.
In the
what is
immediate
immanent,
now.
In the immediate now, and it is the transcendent. So it infuses both the immanent and the transcendent with oneness.
Yes.
And the same with the other mantras that are used by the Christian church or whatever.
Yes.
If you truly attune to them, they take you to that place of formless awareness. And then from that formless awareness comes a form, which is usually the form of the religion. And the idea is to go through whatever form your religion gives to you, to go to that formless level, which makes every religion the same religion,
Yes.
because it is the one spirit.
Yes.
The one spirit. It's like right here with the picture, this light can be looked upon as the formless. And all the clouds here are all the different religions
Yes.
that take on the form. But you have to recognize, like the Buddhists say, form here is only emptiness, emptiness only form. Because there's the infusion of the transcendent and the immanent. And it's like you cannot persecute someone for the religion when you realize that on the formless level, We are all the same. It is all one spirit manifesting through a prism in many colors, so that
In
everybody can
infinite
pick the
colors
color.
and dynamics, yet one energy,
Yes.
one common,
That's a good
universal
Yes.
energy. In that energy, for instance, water, how would that relate?
Well, everything is slowed down, light and sound. So when you slow something down, it becomes physical. But it's like in its higher expression, it's light. When a person goes through the process of dying, it's like there's a light evoked in each chakra as the energy rises, as it rises, and that's the subtle aspect. And from here down, and from here up, and then from here out. So
It's like the double helix, both,
It
downwards and upwards, infinitely and infinitely down, as an eternal one, an infinite and eternal one
yes,
that includes all of us and everything and everyone, if only we have the consciousness and the willingness to surrender to that teaching and that unfolding within us.
yes, and there's awareness of the subtle aspect. And when you tune into the subtle aspect, you can leave yourself, your physical self, consciously, and you become aware of where you are and what you're experiencing. Then you come back into physical life, and that contemplation that you've experienced, you now understand a higher world, and that allows you to psychologically change and deal with situations. And when it comes to the point of physically going to the other side, you've already been there in your subtle form. And in your subtle form, you recognize now that you're leaving physically. Now you can break the silver cord, because in the presence of spirit, you're taken to the place you have earned, and now you're doing it consciously. If, on the other hand, all you've listened to is the external world,
Yes.
what people have told you to do, how to do it, and you've identified with the world, then at the point of going to a higher place, you go through fear and terror, because you've invested yourself solely in the physical universe, and your shortcomings, your aberrations, your hatreds, and that's what causes so much grief. It's like the demons come to you at the point of death because that's what you cultivated. But if you've made friends with the demons that are part of your psyche, then the demons become angels to lead you into heaven.
Yes. That's
You know-
beautifully said. Another friend of mine, a teacher, in yoga,
Yes.
in Nam Yoga, NAAM Yoga. You can check it out, namyoga.com. Dr. Levry, I had heard him say that our job as conscious human beings is to make friends of our enemies, whether they be external or both external and internal within us,
Yes.
to make angels of our friends, internal. Oh my God, it's a Freudian slip, both internal and external. I had it backwards. I was working on making angels of my friends on the external, not realizing I have to do it on the internal as well.
Well, a mistake is never a mistake. What you said, there'll be people in the audience that'll understand that, because that's what they need to hear.
Yes. Yes.
So, as
Thank you for divining me.
Well, it's this too. It's like people are going to watch this,
Yes.
and they're going to experience their own story, which we've
Yes.
talked about.
Yes.
And their own story is much more important than the one that we are telling,
Yes.
because they are going to places in the subtle world as we talk,
Yes.
and that becomes their own knowledge. That becomes self-knowledge that can become wisdom. If we can be the instrument by which they find their wisdom,
Yes.
so be it. We do our best. The idea is not to be able to repeat what we've said. The idea is to go within yourself and find those high truths
Yes.
that resonate with you and
Yes.
make you more human and aware of yourself in an essential way.
You know, our purpose here in our discussions and our, you know, I don't even like to think of them as interviews. I prefer to proclaim them as inner views. And in sharing these inner, you know, and as you spoke of, we've spoken of, you know, this show is about death and also dying. I've had the experience, you know, of, you know, one near-death experience when I was 4.
I was going to ask you about that, yes.
And you know, family drama stuff that, you know, is you know, not easy to remember and really not necessary. You know, I've done my work there, but it gave me my first chance to make a vow to myself when I was 4 that I would never engage in violence against another human being or towards another human being. You know, I look to find ways through the mind and through the emotions to inspire people, the circumstance, including myself, beyond violence
Yes.
or harming someone, not just in the physical, but even in the emotional or the mental and the words.
Yes.
You know, and through my youth from 4 to 34, you know, I just lived in that bubble of always trying to protect others so that I could find some safety or sanctuary for myself in moments of peace. You know, at 34, I had the experience of really wanting to face some of my fears and my fears with men. And I was a man. And I'd feared that. So I did a men's weekend,
Yes.
you know, with almost 200 strange, fascinating, incredible men. From all backgrounds of life, from the highest to the lowest, it seemed.
Yes.
You know, and not that lawyers are the highest, or ministers are the highest, or rabbis are the highest, and, you know, and not that, people that are unemployed or homeless or they've fallen through the cracks, even through the criminal system, and then they're finding their way into society, looking for an honorable manhood and a rites of passage. And as I went into that very confronting circumstance to me of joining a men's weekend,
Yes.
which was a emotional, physiological roller coaster, like boot camp for the men of the 20th century and 21st century,
Yes.
and understanding some rules of what makes men function, distinct from understanding what makes women function, because it has been said that it's impossible for a man to fully understand the magnificence of a woman and all of her infinite complexities and beauties. So in that first weekend, I became so ill, pneumonia and all kinds of, whatever my demons were, they came out that weekend.
Yes.
And I had, through that, a near-death experience. My system just overloaded through the pneumonia and a high fever, actually had a heart attack and crashed down, and the body couldn't move. My worst fear had manifested. Here I was in the company of a couple of hundred men. I didn't trust men. The last thing I wanted was to be helpless in that environment.
Yes.
And didn't that give me the greatest lesson? Here I'm lying on the floor feeling I had spears stuck through me. Probably did, emotional wounds. And, I can't move, can't talk. I can barely have bare conscious. The pain is riveting.
Yes.
And I don't know who, but there were only men there, and they got me to a hospital. And just like I was like barely hanging on. Apparently I'm told they called my family and said he's probably not going to make the night. And finally, I know, and things are tubes and whatever's going on. And finally, I remember some relief. It's like this ray of light came in. on the left side, and it was like this tunnel, a silver tunnel, and there was a sense of some positive energy or entities that were saying, come. And I did, and I just rose up this light tunnel, and all of a sudden I was in another dimension that, it wasn't clouds, but it was very ephemeral. And I was told, that I was welcomed and I was greatly loved, and this is a transition time for me. And there was an angelic being that just sort of embraced and said, this is a transition time. You're safe. This is a sacred time. You are going to be given, your life contract is complete up to now, and you're going to be given the opportunity of a life review. And after that, you can decide if you want to come back.
Yes. Hilton, please don't give me this being's name.
No.
Keep that to yourself.
Yes, yes.
Because there's a certain part of these experiences that are sacred.
Yes.
You can't really share it with the world.
Yes.
You can point in the direction.
Yes.
So the contract
Yes.
was presented to you, and you renegotiated the contract.
Yeah, I wasn't intent. I went through all the times that love was given and love was received. There were all these cameo pictures of my relationships with my family and friends and and loved ones. I had a common law marriage for 4 or 5 years, raised 2 stepchildren, and all of these wonderful beings. And I was done. I wasn't coming back. And then this new friend of mine appeared. They sort of said, okay, but you've got one more relationship you think you forgot. And this new friend of mine, Madeline, who is this amazing older dame.
Yes.
And
a divine dame in many ways.
I didn't quite recognize it, but I felt it. Just this amazing new friend. And we determined, because we had, this age difference, actually a huge age difference, we determined that we could just be friends. We don't have to worry about ever anything else, even though she'd been divorced, and I guess I have too. We weren't looking for another, but we just became wonderful friends.
Yes.
And I saw this cameo of Madeline, and I'd only known her for a few months, and I realized, oh my gosh, I want to be able to go for walks with her. I want to be able to hold her hand and go for walks with her. I actually remember I wanted to find a tree and to hug it with her. I didn't recognize at the time that I wanted to find the tree of life.
Interesting symbol.
Distinct from the tree of knowledge.
Yes.
And that's been the journey I've been on for the last 26 years. From that, because as soon as I decided, no, I want to be able to go for walks with her, poof, back in my body, but the horrific pain that I was experiencing wasn't there anymore.
Ah.
The next morning, the hospital, when the nurse, the staff, they said, we don't know what's happened, sir. You have no more you don't have any damage. You're going to be all right. You're a little weakened from the experience, so we want you to stay for a couple of days.
Yes.
And when I came back into consciousness, and I had this sense of wonder, of really a trust for the eternal that I had not known before. And as I gathered some strength and returned to my home in Toronto, life continued to unfold. Little did I know that another half year later, I would ask Madeline to marry me. And guess what? She said yes.
And it wasn't that one of the biggest journeys of my life.
Yes, it was.
Certainly the most pivotal.
Yeah.
And she was and is and forever will be, at least as far as I can manage it for this life to my last breath. She is my divine dame.
Yeah, it's good to have something like that.
Yeah, and I maintain that relationship. Sometimes I even just dance with her in spirit. Mm-hmm. So, even with her translation and her death, I have a sense of that relationship that is eternal and infinite and indestructible, which is a love that we spoke of sharing with each other.
Yes.
So there was some preparation, because Madeline also knew, because she was older, even before I asked her to marry, she expected that she'd die in 5 or 10 years. And just, translate. And she was prepared for it. I wasn't.
Yes.
And I truly fell in love with her. And then in the 12 years or 14 years that she was struggling to die, or dying, and spent her final 10 years in long-term care, like a
Yeah.
beautiful retirement home, but nevertheless she didn't want to be there. She just wanted to go. I actually interfered a few times because I didn't want her to die. And
Yes.
I took actions with hospitals to help keep her alive, and I just did everything for her to live. And it got harder to create heaven on earth with her because her body was, and I wasn't ready to let go, so it took another 14 years. You know, and great love, but I also got to experience, she told me she hated me sometimes.
Yes, I kind of remember that part too.
Yeah. And with this, it's sort of like I got to practice, as she told me that she fell out of love with me. I got to practice not just falling in love, but I then chose to say, because I took my vows seriously, to love, honor, and cherish.
Yes.
You know, for better or for worse. So I was getting some of the worst, but initially I had amazing. The first 7 years were just Camelot. You know, the second year or second 7 cycle was difficult, but you know, I was still looking. The last 7 years, it was brutal. And brutalizing really for both of us. For her and in the physical, and I couldn't even imagine, because she was so emotionally strong,
Yes.
that she would have emotional difficulties or mental difficulties, because she was such a divine dame. Just like so inspiring. By her being, not by what she said. You know, my favorite saying though, she used to say, "Let your light shine." And that was really
Yes,
the birth. That was really the birth of "Let Your Divine Shine."
Yes.
And that's why this show is happening also, in
Oh,
honor
that's
of,
interesting.
my divine dame. And, so, divine dame, divine dudes. So even though she was prepared in dying for, and even looking forward to her time when she translated or died,
Yes.
and I'm going to be having my book published, telling our story.
Oh, that's good.
Divine dude, divine dame. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes.
What I'm wanting to understand, how can we do a better job? I have some consciousness of that, this body will die, will translate. So how can I be responsible for that in a delightful, divine, and an honoring way? Whether it's 30 years, or 30 days. Hopefully more towards the 30 years. Or something in between. And if I'm called to serve and able to serve longer, great. But how do we, from now, regardless of how eternal we are, eternally young or eternally old or eternally ancient, I like to call us the eternal agers.
Eternal ages.
How do we come in the present of now to start preparing for the transformation before death and before dying, so that we are empowered and engaged and even a little enlightened? What are some of the steps?
Well, I think everybody has watched the steps right here.
Yes.
I gave you the space, the sacred space, to express everything that you needed to, on the depth you needed to. That means when I wanted to say something, I noticed it and I let it go, because you needed to express more than I did. So
Thank you.
when you begin to put other people first, you are preparing to go to a higher place while you're living, and when you go to the other side, you go to a higher place because of the act of giving, the sense of compassion for other people's difficulties.
Yeah.
Because by allowing others to raise themselves up, you are raised.
Yes.
So what you've experienced here and seen is active compassion, and the compassion is a detached compassion. You don't get pulled in, you just produce the sacred space,
Yes.
and the person expresses whatever needs to be expressed, and behind all the expression, is the awakening of that person's spirit. And that's one of the ways you prepare in this life. Those that love greatly are prepared to go at any time. When Gandhi was shot,
Yes.
it would be Bam! It goes Ram, the Hindu name for God, then he drops. He didn't say that no good guy, or I'm going to die, or this shouldn't be happening to me. He
Yes.
always had his bags packed, and so when he was shot dead, his spirit just flew from his body. He was ready. That's because of his great ability to love and sacrifice himself for people.
For all of his countrymen, even the English, who were so aggressive and overshadowing. You know, as much as they'd served to bring a certain level, there was a time that service had to come to its close so it could evolve.
Yes, and he never resisted.
No.
And it was like, at one time, the story that impressed me is that they put him into a prison that was circular and domed. And they were working on the principle that he could not fix his attention, his mind in any place, and they would drive him crazy. But the idea, he knew he was more than the mind and body. He knew that he was spirit.
Yes.
So at the end of the time, 30 days, 3 months, whatever it was, he came out refreshed, ready to go back. Because he wasn't just functioning on the level of other people. He was functioning from divine times, which he lived in,
Yes.
and he was a divine dude.
Truly.
And so by a non-resistant way of living in the world, he dethroned the British gently
By his divine way of living and expressing.
with his divine way of living and expressing and keeping his heart center open,
Yes.
and so things could change.
So this keeping the heart center open, you know, I know that when I have fun calling her my late wife because Madeline was always early.
And, you know, I was usually late. You know, maybe it was a match made in heaven. We both had to learn, you know, something there. So, notwithstanding my beautiful late wife, Madeline,
Would God, I think that was it.
just my late wife, Madeline, her presence is,
To me, everlasting, and the opportunity to just be present says it all.
It says it all.
Yeah. And even in, at times, my remorse, or I get caught in my emotions, that's really me getting caught in my ego, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be. It's everybody has to decipher their own way of trapping themselves
Yes.
and a way of releasing that trap.
So that's like a false identity, just like false pride.
Yes, and it's very subtle, like you don't know it.
Yeah.
Maybe other people can see it in you, but you
Yes.
can't see it yourself. So people can say what they want to.
Yeah.
You have to recognize in yourself the means by which you fool yourself.
Yeah.
You have to be truthful to yourself. When you say that doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, then you're fooling yourself. So there's a need to be utterly true to yourself. To thine own self be true, and it shall follow the day, the night. Thou canst not then be false to any man. You got to be truthful.
Yes. To thine own self be true. You know, we cannot change anybody. You know, regardless of how much we want to help them or love them.
All we can do is point, and we can produce a sacred space
Yes.
so that they may find themselves. And that's giving people that physical space and psychological space and spiritual space to turn around when they're going the wrong direction. When you tell them to turn around, they'll just resist you. but you let them go the direction they need, and then they learn, and because you're not condemning them, because you're living in a sacred space, they turn around and they come to themselves, and they recognize the ways that they've devised to fool themselves. And it's that insight that gives you wisdom, and it's that insight that gives you compassion towards yourself and other people.
So the way to actually celebrate, on the dying, I know there was some saying maybe around Gandhi, when a child is born, birth, the child cries, the newborn cries, and everyone else is so happy, full of glee. And then when that same being dies, everyone is crying. And it's crying not for the person necessarily, but for their own loss of being able to relate to that person. And it's said that the person that has died, and certainly from my own experience of remembering the other side, it was bliss. So it's not even happiness, it's bliss. Nirvana,
It is bliss.
beyond description. And that, is I've experienced and believe that's within, it's available, and it is within all of us. It is the seed, the light seed, the sound seed, the wave. And as I make peace, even profound and increasing peace and practice peace with all the challenges and duplicity and drama,
Yes.
and translate or transform that, even if I may say to sublimate it so that I don't suffer it, but to sublimate it and accepting and working with it as best I can to contribute it, but not change it, just offer to it. And if there's resistance, then allow the resistance to go. If there's no resistance, then allow, and to be detached, and to be in that pure presence of conscious exchange or offering, but also from a divine time perspective or a divine being perspective in the eternal. I'm discovering it's perhaps easier, or it seems, my biased viewpoint, that certainly for us eternal agers, 50 plus, when we get to contend with our life is, we have a foreseeable end.
Yes.
Whereas oftentimes, in our youth and our earlier youth and adolescence and young, adulthood, we don't have to deal with it because we don't think we're going to have to deal with it, for, in our 20s and 30s, we don't expect to have to deal with it for 50 years, another half century or so. Except for those that are both challenged and blessed with, they have some other challenges which may bring their life to a shorter close in 60 days to 6 years,
Yes.
give or take. So how can we offer something to I think we've covered things that for people that are prepared to look at their death and their dying and take some playful insight to allowing that and preparing for it and celebrating that and making it easier for everyone or anyone that's dear to them. How can we offer someone or everyone, even the younger generations, those that are resisting or are not aware of death and dying, what can we offer to them as a practice or a consciousness?
Okay, well, here's a contemplation seed.
Please.
Are you looking? Are you listening? There it is right there.
Yes.
It's an hourglass. As the sand goes through, in this case, a blue sand, it's always in the present moment. And that's our life. We can live it in the present moment and live in a state of joy. And when it goes all the way through, and we give up what we know here, it just gets turned over, and we have another existence, whether it's in a higher dimension or whether it's back here physically, whatever you want to believe.
Yes.
But this is the eternal circle of how things are. Now, this symbol can be used, and you go inward and outward simultaneously to see how this symbol pertains to your life. And the symbol is a form, and all these symbols point to a formless understanding. But begin with this form, and those look like pebbles or something, or rocks down there. Life can be rocky.
Oh, sure. Yes.
And even though it's rocky, those are the experiences you need to go through so that you can live in the eternal present. Because people that have evolved, their lives generally are not easy. The rocks, they've learned to not resist. Gandhi did not resist everything that was thrown at him.
Yes.
Sticks and stones. He told his people that when he was protesting, the Indian soldiers would come with sticks and break the sticks over the people's heads. He said, don't resist it. You have to decide whether this is for you. Otherwise, don't come with me. But I can't have you harming the soldiers, because God's taking care of us and God's taking care of them. And there is no us and them, even though the soldiers believe that. And some of the Indian soldiers and the British soldiers broke down, and they couldn't harm Gandhi and his people because
Any
they
further.
recognized that it was love from a higher level,
Yes.
and they had no way of defending themselves from that.
Yes.
So even though brutalized,
Yes.
they held the state of love, they lived in the present, and they were ready in this life or the next life or whatever life there was to be essentially themselves.
To be in the eternal, and even, towards ascending towards that eternal oneness.
Divine times.
Divine times available for each and every one of us, actually calling. And if you're tuning into this, you're definitely on some kind of a path. So just celebrating you onwards, and particularly inwards. I'd like to comment, in this glass, an hourglass.
Yes.
The hour is not just symbolic of the time of an hour, it's also hours.
It's
O-U-R-S.
And the shape is the infinity sign.
Which
It
is
goes like that.
beyond up or down,
Yeah.
and this can be turned sideways, back and forth. And
Very good,
actually,
got it.
the matrix, or the eternal point.
Yes.
And even if this, as the vessel, with a gust of wind or some other vehicle or event gets lifted up,
Yes.
and then crashes down for some reason, and then is extended, splattered amongst the rocks to disappear.
And that's the form of it, because the formless
Yes.
is never harmed by the changes of the form.
So even the dust, as it spreads, its eternal nature is star dust, if I may. I think that's the other half of the truth. They've said, from dust to dust, but, the wholeness. So if we look at anything that is said in duality, let's find the other side of it. Neither one of them are wrong. There's
That's right.
value in
That's right.
both,
Yes.
light, dark, good, bad, positive, negative. And in that divine dance and alchemy then, from duality, we can say Trinity, because then it's not just you and me, it's also us, all of us.
Yeah, every polarity has a neutral point of spirit
Yes.
that manifests that polarity.
Mm-hmm.
And it's finding the neutral, eternal moment and living in it without grasping it, and living in it as a spirit, not as a mind, because the mind can only work with polarities and duality. Sometimes when I've experienced my grandchildren and something's happened and they say something to me,
And they're 5, 4, 6 type thing, yes?
4 and 8, it's like they bring me to a neutral point. And the love is a detached love for them, but it's so intense. And it's not like the lower part of love, hate, which are just polarities. It's really a divine love, which is a neutral force.
And that's a looking forward to being guided, but
Yeah.
in both ways, because I'm imagining that not only are you teaching them, but it seems that their presence would be teaching you. Would that be true?
Of course. I mean, if you're open, you find teaching everywhere.
And with everyone.
Like I spoke to Star today,
Yes.
one of the young ladies that works here,
Yes.
and whether she knows it or not, she gave me a teaching. I spoke to Chris, and he gave me a teaching.
Chris, our wonderful producer and technician that just makes all these wonderful creations even better. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Star.
Yeah, and something happened today. Do I have time for a short story?
Yes.
I was having a coffee, and this young lady came up to me, and her name was Christina.
Yes.
Chrissy, if you see this, you should be in touch with us. So I was sitting there, and she came up and she sat down, and she says, "Now you don't have to do anything," he says, "but I'm going to ask you because I'm doing a study, and you can say absolutely no or absolutely yes." And I could tell by the way she was dressed and her presentation of self that she was a pretty integrated young lady. And she says, "I'm going to ask you to buy me something, and whatever you want to say." And I says, "Of course I'll buy you something. What do you want?" She says, "I'll go look." And she said she was doing some kind of study, and she was also testing herself, putting herself out into the world, doing things so she could go to a more refined aspect of herself. So she went back and she came back with peaches. And I said, "Okay, now go wash 2 of them because I have a friend, you, Hilton, and we're going to have those peaches." And I says, "Now here," and I gave her a 20. I says, "If you don't want to come back and you take the 20, I says, that's fine. Because the giving of it is giving completely.
Yes.
No conditions on it.
Yes.
Like, if you really need this, take it and go with it. I'm giving it
Yes.
from a higher place."
Yes.
And she came back with the peaches. She had the 2 washed for you and I.
Yes.
And I says, "Now bless the peaches and I'll bless the ones for you, and we can exchange blessings, and it's the fruit of our labor.
Yes.
And I said, "What do you think of that?" And she says, "That's peachy."
I totally agree.
Yes, and I thought, that's very good. And she said something to me. She says, "Did you ever hear of Ram Dass?" And I says, "Well, way back, I certainly did." I didn't tell her this, but I went and saw Ram Dass when he was at University of Toronto when I was going to school.
Yes.
And she was delighted that I knew Ram Dass.
Yes. Yes.
And she says, "Well, what are you doing down here?" I said, "Well, I'm going to be recording something down here today." And she thought that was great. And then she went her way, and I went my way. And there was other stuff. I did a certain ritual. I says, "Now watch when I walk over here," and I can't tell you what the ritual is because that's between her and I.
Yes.
I want to do a little ritual, and I did the ritual. I looked over and she was watching me, and then I came back and sat down. She says, "What did that mean?" I says, "It means what you want it to mean, what you read into it, what it evokes in you. But you
Yes.
could tell my vibration when I was doing that ritual. I was raising my consciousness. So whatever you attribute to that ritual will be from the highest part of you. And that's the important part."
Yes.
And she went her way, and I went my way, and I may never see her again, or I might see her on this program, and she'll be in touch. But those are the little things that happen in life. It's like,
Yes.
in order to give like that, you got to go through a mini death,
Yes.
because your mind goes, "Oh, is she ripping me off?" All this stuff.
All the expectations, just to be present and to say, how can I serve?
It's
How can I
serve?
love better?
How can I serve? How can I love?
How can I be light?
How can I be open to what Spirit wants done in this situation? And that way your ego stands out of the way and your soul enters the world consciously. And your mind is somewhat purified, and your emotions and your body and the environment around you is purified if you live in a pure high state. Interesting stuff, fascinating, just fascinating. It makes life so interesting. Oh, I said to her, what did I say to her about, I said something about, this is so amusing to me, because she says, I was just attracted to you when I saw you. I says, this is so amusing, and there's an inner laughter going on, and if it cost me $20, I should have given more, because it was worth much more than that. This is before I said, whatever you want to do, if you just want to go with the 20, no, that was fine. But she gave me such joy, like the kind of joy I have with my granddaughter who's 4. Sometimes that kind of joy is evoked in me, and that has no price.
Yeah.
There's no monetary value that can be attached to it. It's just something of a higher world, of divine times.
Yeah. Priceless, precious moments.
Yes.
And rather than looking for them, what I'm learning is to live to generate them and look for every opportunity to give preciousness.
Yes.
And not because I want it to be precious, but just to even give and to serve and to listen, to learn, to laugh, to love.
Yeah, but I want to add something here. Last week when we were coming upstairs,
Yes.
someone psychically attacked us.
Oh, yeah.
They had their knife out, their psychic knife, and they were getting us in the heart, and I immediately shielded myself from them
Yeah.
because I could see that they had malintent and
Yeah.
they misinterpreted everything that we were doing
Yes.
according to their
Yes.
dark understanding,
Yes.
and psychically, so to speak, he stabbed Hilton. And I could see Hilton like taking the blows, and before I could do anything, it was over. It was very quick. And it was like it took him maybe 20 minutes, half an hour after that, to come back to himself
Yeah.
and realize that level of openness sometimes terrifies people. So
Yeah, I
you-
was
you
so
don't-
surprised.
Yeah, and so you got to recognize that when you're giving cannot be received, it comes back to you plus their energy.
Yeah.
And so you got to know you produce the sacred space that the people need, not the one you think they need or the one that you want to give. In this case, the sacred space was not letting the person invade and just trying to relax them. But you don't allow people to harm you because you have a loving heart.
I remember I had wanted to give a precious moment, in just being a neighbor tenant or guest tenant in the building as we were coming in, and this person had a key, and whatever the I thought I just saw some wonders unfolding, and this person had nothing but suspicion and cynicism and yes, and real cynicism. And there was no, so I didn't, I suffered it rather than recognized it, and just responded. No, I understand. It's okay. No problems. And that's the opportunity.
The aura breaks from the inside. You break it from the inside. And so when it's broken, you break it from the inside with a reaction. It allows people's energy to enter into that crack, into that opening, into that wound.
Yeah.
So when it cracks open, you have to seal it immediately.
Yes.
And pay homage to your higher nature, which is angelic, which you do not receive those energies because you do not want to be poisoned by them. You let them reflect back to the person. And now they got a picture of an angel here, and you see how impartial the look is. You see, angels only obey God they have, I said this before, the angels obey God because that's their nature. But human beings are higher than angels because they don't have to obey God. They have free will to choose to obey God's will. So Satan was condemned to hell because he would not bow down to mankind, because he put himself above mankind. And I said this.
So it wasn't to the higher, like he wouldn't bow down to who he judged to be the lower.
Even though it was God's will that humans, because they had free will,
Yes.
but in a certain way he was exhibiting free will.
Yes.
And in another tradition besides Christianity, it was said that what sustains Satan in hell is God's words to him, "Get thee out, Satan." But just listening to God's words, even though they were of condemnation, it's still, he has a love for God because Satan was an archangel.
Yes.
Which comes back into the idea of the polarity of the negative and the positive in the human nature. We have the satanic, the demonic, and we have the angelic. But with our free will, we choose God's will, the higher will. We choose the higher path beyond the polarities. And when we do that, we're fully human, functioning as the souls that we are.
I've heard it said, not only are we to, make friends of our enemies and to make angels of our friends, but that we are, in the highest service to make archangels of our beloveds. What, as you maybe understand it, is the distinction between angels and archangels and our relationship, or what could it be?
Well, an archangel is like the highest archetype, prototype. And it's still just a form.
Yes.
But when we rise to our higher nature, we're working with that archangel energy, which is a major angel, an archangel, for good or bad in this case.
Could that archangel be within us, as our higher or highest self?
Yes. All that stuff, everything in creation, everything we can conceive of or perceive
Is a reflection of us?
is us, yes, whether it's
Is
inside
us.
us or outside us. But it's like when we make friends with the multitude of others within us
Yes.
and the multitude of others around us, we come to the neutral point, which you're using the term archangel. I use the word our essence, our soul, our atma. The
Yes.
Buddhists use the word jalu, which means light, body. But whatever the term you want to use, that's the pivotal point
Yes.
of all creation. It is the eternal present. It is our higher self. It is omniscient,
Yes.
omnipotent, omnipresent. And that is our true nature. Those are just words. But use the words and go through them
As a framework to experience and express and expand, expound, and enlighten even.
as a matrix and go through the matrix to that higher place beyond the words.
Yes. Stephen, eternal gratitude for sharing, this interview and journey, and finding, and defining, divine times,
Yes.
not only for me, but for everyone that tunes in.
You're welcome.
This is Hilton Milan, thanking you for letting your divine shine. See you in the light.